So this week's episode of Children of the Whales drops a lot of information. In a lot of ways, this episode feels like something you would typically see in the episode 8 or 9 mark of a lot of series, because it really feels like we're getting to a lot of the endgame stuff fairly quickly, but then when you see a lot of the information revealed, it opens up a bunch of new doors we didn't even see there. And this was a really interesting episode for the most part. There was a couple of things I wasn't a huge fan of. There was a little bit of a pacing issue off and on, and some of that random comedy that was scattered throughout. But for the most part, a lot of these reveals I thought were fairly interesting, like this beast underneath the island. We get the exact confirmation of what they are, and it's identical to what was on Leokis' island that was feeding on their emotions. And when I was initially heard that, I was like, okay, if it's the same type of creature that was feeding on the emotions, why the hell the whale island not affected? Like, they obviously have emotions. They're completely different from the Empire, who feeds on their emotions. And then when you hear that, back in the day, they actually just couldn't feed on their emotions, that essentially they rebelled against the mud whale, and the mud whale basically just accepted the fact that he was going to live a life, essentially, just not feeding on their emotions. So essentially their sin was they didn't let this beast feed on their emotion. Essentially, they got cast aside into this kind of sandy desert location where essentially they were supposed to rot away. And then, like anything with history, the victors, or in this case, the one with the most power, altered history to make the mud whale seem like this very evil and just hated group. Like, they were nothing but filled with rage. This is why we feed on your emotions, because we don't want to turn you into savages like the mud whale. So then when characters like Leokis see the mud whale, they see that the Empire was just lying to them all along. That's such an interesting twist, because I really was questioning, what is their sin? What did they do to cause them to be locked away and isolated for all eternity? And why does the Empire hate them so much? And to see that the way of life was to feed on their emotions by these beasts, and apparently the Empire has 8 of these ships, 8 of these beasts, but there's also different countries around that oppose the Empire, similar to what the Whale Island is doing right now. It's so interesting to see how this world functions with these giant islands that move around, that is controlled by a demonic beast in a lot of ways that's supposed to feed on the emotions, but not all succeeded in the case of the Mud Whale Island. And that's very, very interesting. I really like how the history in the world is being built in the series. Even if you're not a huge fan of maybe the story of the characters, just the overall idea of how this world functions is so interesting and unique, and it has me just latched on to what's ultimately going to happen. Because right now, essentially, the new way is opposing the old way. The old way was essentially, we gotta basically do a mass suicide and kill ourselves because we can't possibly win against this. But then ultimately, after the archers that were trying to kill the beast down there learned that basically they were going to kill themselves by killing it, they ultimately are saying no, we would rather try to fight and live than just give up. Because that's kind of the difference of the younger mindset versus the older mindset, where the older mindset is very stuck in its ways, thinking this is how it is, we have longer lives, we've lived in this kind of captivity forever, and we know this is what ultimately has to happen. Whereas other characters like Oni and whatnot are basically saying, no, we will fight and we will beat them, we'll hold them back until we can find allies that will work with us, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I really like how they did that. I just find it very interesting, because even that little girl who was sitting with this creature, she calls the creature mama and then kind of absorbs into it, and it feels like it was almost like it was a sacrifice, giving her life force to heal the beast. But at the very end of the episode, you see her with these wings, and it's very interesting. Is she even a real girl? Is this just an avatar of this beast? What exactly is that relationship? That's something that I'm very interested in. I still got a lot of questions with the whole child and beast relationship, but for the most part, a lot of the questions that last week brought up, I feel were answered and explained fairly well with episode 5. I thought it was so interesting seeing the ideals clash between a younger generation and an older one, and also just learning so much about the history of this world and why characters like Leokis are essentially saying no, I will completely side with you, because all my life I was told that your country was this evil barbarian savages who are just filled with hatred and lust. But then you see, no, they actually have a normal way of life, they're happy, they have families. And I just like that clashing of ideals. And it's going to be so interesting to see if they can successfully hold off the Empire long enough so that they could gain allies. And obviously we're not going to see this all come to a conclusion in 12 episodes. I mean, this is based on an ongoing source material, but I'm going to be very interested to see how far they can get in these 12 episodes. And then if we do get that second season, which will be amazing, it'll be nice to see how it will go going forward. But this was a very interesting episode. Even there was some pacing issues off and on, I felt I felt like some of it kind of sped by a little too quickly, and then there was that kind of like random one-off humor, which I don't really understand the point of because they really didn't have that for the most part in this series. But at the end of the day, this answered so many questions and just built onto the foundation of this world so well, and I find that just this art is just making this atmosphere feel just so immersive, far past what the script is already doing. The script is doing a wonderful job at building onto the history of this world. Atmosphere, it gets you that eerie and also just kind of magical vibe. And there was one point in the episode, like near the beginning of the episode, where essentially when they were trying to launch the arrows into this beast, it almost felt like we were listening to a video game boss soundtrack. Like, soundtrack to this show can be just so damn amazing, as can the visuals. I mean, seriously, I'm really enjoying this show. I can't wait to see where episode 6 is gonna go, and ultimately if they can hold off the Empire, because the Empire has 8 ships, and I mean, if they can withhold one more ship, I assume they're just gonna throw their entire fleet at them, but time will tell. But let me know your thoughts. What do you think of episode 5, and how excited are you for episode 6 next week? Let me know your thoughts, and before I leave, smack that like button, show your support. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.